How do you end the life of James Tiberius Kirk? This was the question facing the Star Trek movie franchise as the torch was passed to the next generation. The iconic captain was set to make his final curtain call, but the way they did him in remains controversial to this day. So, let me tell you all about the fate of Captain Kirk, and how writing the demise of a legend ended up being much easier said than done.
I should have done this a long time ago.
1994 to 1995 was an incredible time to be a Star Trek fan. In an 8-month period, we had All Good Things, the grand finale to Star Trek The Next Generation, which was near universally adored. Deep Space Nine kicked off its 3rd season and was really hitting its stride. And Voyager, another brand new show, had its big debut. And nestled right in the middle of all this, TNG was making the shift from TV to the big screen. The studio wanted to strike while the iron was hot, and they were in a real hurry to get this thing out. Star Trek Generations was to hit theaters just 6 months after the show ended. It had to be a lot of things. A continuation of the series, a new beginning for the characters, and a passing of the torch from the previous generation.
We have outlived our usefulness.
Star Trek the original series had a great run on the big screen. 6 feature films, with the last one wrapping up in 1991. And that final movie was quite a definitive end to the adventures of the old crew. The Enterprise took one final cruise before being decommissioned, and Kirk leaves his last captain's log, leaving no ambiguity that this is it.
This ship and her history will shortly become the care of another crew. To them and their posterity will we commit our future.
This effectively handed things over to TNG, and they really could have left it there. And in the Star Trek timeline, TNG and TOS are separated by a nearly 80-year time gap, which made a direct passing of the torch kind of difficult. But despite this, they went on to do it several times. Spock, Bones, and Scotty all managed to pop up on TNG at various points, so the connecting tissue between the two eras was well established for the TV audience. But this was the movies. To launch TNG as a box office blockbuster, they needed the big guns, and there was one encounter that everyone had wanted to see for years. Captain Kirk and Captain Picard together at last. Writing this movie fell to veteran Trek writers Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga. But after the fact, the duo admitted that the story fell short of what they were hoping for. Part of the problem was they got very wrapped up in ticking off a checklist of things that needed to happen. Some of these plot points were imposed by the studio, and some they kind of imposed on themselves. First, they had to contrive a meeting between Kirk and Picard. The characters lived nearly a century apart, so how do you do it? They wanted a full reunion of the old cast, but the studio mandated that this could only be in the first 15 minutes. After all, the whole point of this was to launch TNG on the big screen, not to make another TOS movie. The studio also wanted a Khan-type villain, something which had worked well in the other movies, and there had to be Klingons. Moore and Braga themselves really wanted to destroy the Enterprise. And this is the big one, they decided early on that Kirk needed to die. They pictured it as this big dramatic moment, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. So, the duo began connecting the dots, and they landed on this idea of a mystery that begins in the world of TOS and continues into the TNG era. And they'd start things off big, with the death of Captain Kirk. This opening segment is easily the best part of the movie. Kirk is attending this ribbon-cutting ceremony on the Enterprise B. It's the successor to his ship with a crew who are essentially his replacements. He's this old relic who's been put out to pasture. The original plan here was to feature the whole TOS crew. They'd be on the bridge as guests, but when a crisis hits, each of them would take up their familiar workstations, and we get to see them all performing their classic roles one last time. But it was not to be. Leonard Nimoy felt he'd already had 2 good send-offs, once in number 6 and again in TNG. DeForest Kelley felt the same way. To them, it seemed like an empty cameo that would only cheapen what came before. And they were kind of proved right, when their dialogue was just redistributed to the cast members who were willing to show up.
Hell no. You just become nurses, let's go.
When disaster strikes, it's Chekhov tending to the injured. This surely would have been McCoy originally. And while it is a shame we didn't get to see the whole cast back together again, it kind of works better this way. I can believe that Spock and McCoy just had better things to do than to go to this ceremony. They've moved on with their lives after the Enterprise. But now that he's no longer in the captain's chair, Kirk is aimless and adrift.
And what have you been doing since you retired?
Keeping busy.
He has no purpose, so here he is, smiling for the cameras and chasing past glories. But of course, it's here where fate throws him a chance to be relevant once again. The ship encounters this dangerous anomaly, the Nexus, and has to undertake a desperate rescue mission. Alan Ruck is really good here as the new Enterprise captain. He strikes the right balance in that he doesn't come across as incompetent, just that he's inexperienced and in over his head. Time is ticking away and the young crew is dithering over what to do. We get Kirk's agony as he stares at the captain's chair. He's squirming in his seat as all his instincts are telling him to take charge.
Captain, is there something wrong with your chair?
Finally, the old guard are invited to help, and things pick up immediately. Escape requires retooling some tech and engineering, and Kirk finds himself once again being offered the chance to reclaim command.
I'll go. You have the bridge.
Somehow, Kirk has got his wish. He can take command of the Enterprise again. But it's here where he has this big character moment, and he realizes that that's not where he belongs anymore, and that his time has passed.
Wait. Your place is on the bridge of your ship.
Leadership now belongs to a new generation, but that doesn't mean he still can't rise to the call of the hero. Kirk volunteers to clamber down to engineering. He solves the problem and saves the ship, before seemingly being blasted out into space. If this was how Kirk really went out, I think we could all live with this. An act of humility, followed by bravery, followed by self-sacrifice, saving his comrades one last time. We then cut to the future. Well, the future of the previous future. From here is the TNG chunk of the movie, and really this whole story has nothing to do with Kirk. If you took his parts out of the movie entirely, it would work just fine on its own. Kirk is mentioned a grand total of once, and it feels like it's in there just in case the audience forgot about the prologue.
That was a mission where James Kirk was killed.
The TNG bit gets a lot of flack for being a glorified TV episode, and it kind of is. The plot is pretty simple. The Enterprise investigates something odd at a starbase. They find a strange scientist man, who is later revealed to be a villain in cahoots with longtime antagonists the Duras sisters. They follow some clues that lead them to a planet where Picard and the bad guy have a big confrontation. They do go to a lot of effort to make all this look cinematic. The holodeck scene on the sailing ship is something they could never have done on TV. Same goes for the Astrometrics lab, which is epic in scale. And they put the work in to dress up the old sets from the show with more exciting camera angles and intricate lighting arrangements. There's also dramatic developments that they'd never have done on TV. Data activates his emotion chip, and we get real evolution of his character. He struggles to control his new feelings, and even questions whether it's worth having them at all. It also provides a lot of the comedy, as Data acts wildly out of character.
Mr. Tricorder.
Picard also gets plenty to chew on, as deaths in the family lead him to question his choices in life and meditate on his own mortality. This whole section delivers a lot for longtime fans, and despite its imperfections, it successfully launched TNG as a big screen brand. But through all this, we are waiting for Kirk to come back. I mean, nobody watching this really thinks he's dead. So, Picard ends up getting sucked up into the Nexus. The Nexus is a catch-all plot contrivance. It takes you to your own personal heaven. Time has no meaning there. If you leave, it can send you anywhere in time and space. And even if you do leave, part of you is kind of still in it, I guess. Writer Brannon Braga, who is like the king of convoluted Trek time travel stories, even admits that his whole idea for the Nexus doesn't really make any sense. But through the power of Nexus magic, Picard and Kirk finally get to have their legendary encounter. And this was highly anticipated by sci-fi nerds. At the time, everyone had an opinion on which captain was better.
Only question I ever thought was hard, what do I like, Kirk, or do I like Picard?
Some guys at MIT are sending us reasons why Captain Picard is better than Captain Kirk.
They're out of their minds.
We all knew they'd end up working together, but we also expected a bit of conflict between them. The writers knew this. Braga's big picture vision early on was of two enterprises locked in battle. That's what would go on the poster. That's what would sell the movie. But try as they might, they couldn't figure out how to make this happen. So instead, we get the two captains making eggs in the kitchen. It is fun to see them together, and Shatner is on great form as Kirk. But I think we were all hoping for more of a clash of personalities here. So, Picard is trying to cajole the old captain into coming back to help save the day one more time. We get parallels between the two men, musing on the path not traveled and questioning their choices in life. But what finally convinces Kirk to leave Paradise isn't Picard's words. It's the revelation that, in the Nexus, he feels no sense of risk or danger like he once did. which fits in really nicely with one of his most memorable lines from the old show.
Risk. Risk is our business. That's what the Starship is all about.
A man like Kirk can't live in a comfortable illusion, with no danger, no stakes, no meaning. And so our heroes head back to the real world to do battle with the nefarious Dr. Soren. So, the setup here is that Dr. Soren wants to launch a missile that will detonate the local sun. The shockwave will redirect the Nexus to Viridian 3 and transport him back to the paradise of the Nexus. Unfortunately, the billions of people on Viridian 4 will be wiped out in the process. Picard couldn't stop Soren the first time around, but now the clock is reset, so he's got another shot at it, and this time he's got some backup.
Just who the hell are you?
He's James T. Kirk. Don't you read history?
This was originally meant to go down as follows. Picard and Kirk fight Soren. They save the day, but then tragedy strikes.
You're indestructible. Well, stick close to me and maybe a little of it'll rub off on you.
Writer Ronald D. Moore envisaged this playing out like the classic John Wayne movie Sands of Iwo Jima.
Matter of fact, I never felt so good in my life. How about a cigarette?
At the moment of victory, Captain Kirk is shot in the back. A tragic end as a great man is brought down in a cowardly attack. In his last words, he tells Picard, "It was fun," before a mysterious, awestruck,
"Oh my."
Moore says when he wrote this scene, he broke down in tears. The deed was done. Or was it? The finished movie was put in front of test audiences. They were having a great time right up until the death of Kirk, when they went dead silent. They hated it. Moore and Braga were pulled in by the studio right after and told to come up with a new ending. The crew went back to the desert and they filmed it again. They were given more money to do this, but whatever their new ending was, had to be at the same location, be shot quickly, and fit in with everything else they already had in the can. This time, rather than be shot by the villain, Kirk makes a daring leap onto a collapsing bridge. He gets his hands on a remote that decloaks the missile launcher, and together he and Picard save the day. Our heroes are victorious, but once again, tragedy strikes. The bridge collapses, and just like before, Picard sits with Kirk as he dies.
Oh my.
So this is what they went with. Maybe it was a little better, but I don't think anyone really loved it.
Why is it that the movie begins with such vast ideas and ends in such small cliches?
And that was the normie take. It didn't satisfy the fans either. I mean, I'd always pictured Captain Kirk dying on the bridge, but not like this. But how could this have been done any differently, especially with all the other stuff they had to get into this movie? Well, what if you switched it up? In the opening scenes, Kirk goes down to engineering, but this time he's confronted by Dr. Soren. Soren wants the Nexus to engulf the ship so he can return to paradise, so he tries to stop Kirk. They fight, Kirk wins and gets the ship out of danger, but in his moment of triumph, he's shot in the back by Soren. Kirk is in bad shape, but ends up getting sucked into the Nexus, ironically getting the thing Soren wanted. The test audiences didn't like Kirk dying from a shot in the back, but this time it's fine because we know he's coming back. Fast forward to the final part of the story.
Just who the hell are you?
In the actual movie, Kirk is essentially just Picard's hired muscle, brought in to help fight a total stranger to save a planet full of people we never see. But now that we've moved things around, now Kirk is settling unfinished business with an old enemy. And I think part of the structural problem with Generations is they didn't want Kirk to do the same death twice. And once they had him perform an act of self-sacrifice in the opening, they struggled to figure out something different for him to do in the finale. But now that we've switched it, we have more options. Now we've already seen Kirk die from a cowardly sneak attack. So for the real deal, Kirk can give his life to save the future. The obvious thing would be taking a bullet for Picard. But these are might-have-beens. With Star Trek Generations, the legend of Captain Kirk was finally laid to rest. In 1893, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did the unthinkable and killed off Sherlock Holmes. He wanted to move on and write about other things, so he penned a final story where the legendary detective could go out in a blaze of glory. Holmes was pitted against Professor Moriarty, a villain every bit his equal, and together they plunged to their deaths at Reichenbach Falls. The backlash was immediate. The Strand magazine barely survived as angry fans cancelled their subscriptions in droves. Ultimately, Doyle was forced to contrive a way to bring Holmes back and continue writing more adventures. It was one of the earliest examples of a fan base in revolt, and its refusal to accept that their hero could die. But it was also a business decision. There was too much invested in such an iconic character to just let him stay dead. Now, in his memoirs and interviews, William Shatner always seemed generally fine with killing off Kirk. His relationship towards his most famous role has been hot and cold over the years. Sometimes he really embraces it, and sometimes he's kind of detached.
For crying out loud, it's just a TV show.
Like it's just one of many jobs he did in his career. But I guess right after Generations, he definitely had some feelings about the death of Kirk, because his next gig essentially undid the whole thing. Shatner was coaxed into writing a Star Trek novel. Titled The Return, it starts right where Generations left off, and brings Kirk back from the dead. And so began the alternate timeline known to fans as the Shatnerverse. Now, Shatner didn't do these alone. He worked in collaboration with Garfield and Judith Reeves-Stevens. They're a husband and wife team who've since put out a lot of acclaimed Trek novels and were part of the writing team on Enterprise. The process was that they'd work out the plot together with Shatner, and then the Reeves-Stevenses would put pen to paper. Now, this novel is much better than you'd expect. The story reads like bonkers fan fiction. It's very silly, but never boring. The Federation faces a new threat. The Borg have formed an alliance with a rogue faction of Romulans. These Romulans are led by the granddaughter of the Romulan commander Kirk defeated in Balance of Terror. V'ger from Star Trek The Motion Picture is also kinda linked into this somehow.
The Rand Corporation, in conjunction with the Saucer People, thank you, under the supervision of the Reverse Vampires.
So, the villains steal Kirk's body and bring him back from the dead. He's then brainwashed and sent to assassinate Picard. And what's kinda cool here for all the people who complain about Star Trek Generations is it gives us all the things that we're missing. They figure out how to put Kirk and Picard on opposite sides. There's conflict. They have a fist fight. Who wins? It's broken up before we find out. There's a reunion between Kirk, Ambassador Spock, and a truly ancient Dr. McCoy who's being propped up by a robo-exoskeleton. The story crosses over with Deep Space Nine. Like I said, there's a lot going on in this book. The grand finale sees Kirk beam down to the Borg homeworld, where he then makes a heroic sacrifice, detonating a bomb and saving the Federation one last, final time. Of course, after the success of The Return, they brought him back again. It turns out Kirk survived after being rescued by a bunch of friendly ex-Borgs, led by someone who may or may not be Hugh from TNG. They went on to publish a ton more books in the Shatnerverse, following Kirk's exploits in the 24th century. Now, it seems reasonably certain that William Shatner won't play Kirk on screen again. Probably. I'm almost certain. But I think, like Sherlock Holmes, the legend of Captain Kirk is kind of too big to kill. Not permanently, anyway. He's been a mainstay of pop culture for more than half a century now. We followed his adventures in movies, television, books, video games. There have already been multiple revivals over the years. He's now been played by several actors. And maybe you think it's great that the character can be constantly reimagined. Or maybe you hate all those pretenders, those phony wannabes. Maybe you loved how Generations wrapped things up for Kirk and gave him a definitive ending. Or perhaps, as far as you're concerned, he disappeared from history after that last cruise of the Enterprise A. Or he really did die on the engineering deck of the Enterprise B. Or, God forbid, he's being kept in cryogenic stasis in a secret Section 31 base. Thanks for that one, Star Trek Picard. Or maybe he's still out there, having new adventures in the 24th century. Star Trek Generations tried to define Kirk's legacy through his death, but in the end, all it proved is that he's bigger than that, and his legend will never die. But what do you think? Was there a good way to kill Captain Kirk? Did he ever need to die in the first place? Let me know in the comments. That's all for this one. I'll be seeing you.